May 3rd, 1945. Lüneburg Heath, northern Germany. The Third Reich was in its death throes. Adolf Hitler was dead beneath the ruins of Berlin, and the terrifying Soviet Red Army was ripping the eastern half of Germany to shreds, exacting a brutal revenge for years of German atrocities. But even with the sky collapsing around them, the highest levels of the German high command were still trapped inside a fatal arrogance, a blindness so deep they could not see the humiliation already racing toward them. The new leader of Germany, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, devised a desperate and cunning plan. He would send his top military commanders to the British lines to negotiate a tactical surrender. The Germans did not want to surrender to the Soviets. They knew exactly what awaited them if they did. But really, what they hoped for was something far more calculating. They wanted to surrender only to the British and the Americans, hoping the Western Allies would see them as honorable anti-communist soldiers, shake their hands, and perhaps even join forces with them against the Russians. They expected a grand diplomatic summit. They expected to be treated as equals. They expected respect. To carry out this fantasy, they sent a delegation led by Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeberg and General Eberhard Kinzel. These men were the living image of Aryan Superman propaganda. Perfectly tailored uniforms, immaculate presentation, heavy leather greatcoats, gleaming monocles, polished jackboots, knights' crosses hanging from their necks. Every detail crafted to project command, prestige, superiority. They drove toward the British lines, believing they would be met with full military honors, escorted into some grand chateau, and invited to negotiate across a polished mahogany table. But the reality was something else entirely. Instead, they were driven into a muddy, freezing patch of desolate wasteland called Lüneburg Heath. And waiting for them, there was British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. Montgomery was not there to negotiate. He was not there to welcome them. He was not there to offer them coffee, comfort, or ceremony. He was about to deliver a psychological reality check so brutal, so cold, and so humiliating that it would leave these towering German officers speechless. And in time, it would help drive one of them to take his own life. To understand just how devastating this moment was, you have to look carefully at the men stepping out of those German staff cars that morning. General Eberhard Kinzel was the absolute archetype of the Prussian military elite. He stood 6'5", a massive and imposing figure who literally looked down on almost everyone around him. A monocle sat permanently wedged into his right eye. He had spent years on the Eastern Front, orchestrating the ruthless annihilation of the Soviet people. But in his own mind, he was still a gentleman warrior. That was the delusion. Beside him stood Admiral von Friedeberg, Commander-in-Chief of the German Navy. He was smooth, aristocratic, diplomatic in manner, but beneath that surface was a man who had overseen the U-boat campaigns that sent thousands of British sailors to their deaths in the freezing Atlantic. He carried himself like a statesman, but the blood was there all the same. As they stepped into the mud of Lüneburg Heath, their boots sank into the dirt with a wet, ugly squelch. They looked around in confusion. There was no grand chateau, no honor guard, no ceremony, no polished hall of negotiation. There were only drab camouflage tents, a few armored vehicles, and heavily armed British soldiers staring at them with eyes full of pure, unrestrained hatred. And really, that hatred had a reason. The British Second Army had recently liberated the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. The men guarding Montgomery's headquarters had seen the mountains of skeletal corpses. They had smelled the furnaces. They knew exactly what kind of gentlemen these German officers truly were. So the delegation was left standing there in the freezing rain. No one offered them shelter. No one offered them a drink. No one offered them a chair, a greeting, or even basic courtesy. They were deliberately ignored. Their polished boots sank deeper into the mud. Their leather coats grew heavy with rain. And little by little, their enormous egos began to scrape against the indignity of being treated like nothing. They were waiting for Field Marshal Montgomery. And Montgomery, really, was a man who understood the theatrical power of crushing status better than almost anyone in the Allied command. Bernard Law Montgomery, Monty to his men, was the complete opposite of the German military ideal. While German generals obsessed over perfectly cut uniforms, gold braid, ceremony, posture, and appearance, Montgomery simply did not care. He was brilliant, eccentric, ruthlessly effective. He had crushed the legendary Rommel at the Battle of El Alamein, and he had done it wearing a baggy jumper and a black tank beret pinned with 2 cap badges. That was Monty. No polished myth, no theatrical vanity, just command. And more importantly, He despised the German high command. He saw them not as honorable soldiers, but as criminals who had dragged the world into a bloodbath. Their obsession with protocol and military dignity did not impress him. It disgusted him. So when Montgomery was told the German delegation had arrived and was waiting outside his caravan, he did not hurry out to meet them. He took his time. He finished his paperwork. He drank his tea. He left General Kinzel and Admiral von Friedeberg standing in the rain like disobedient schoolboys. He knew exactly what they were trying to do. They wanted terms. They wanted a deal that would let their armies retreat behind British lines and escape the Soviets. They wanted to preserve some fragment of dignity. Montgomery's answer was simple. Strip them of that dignity, immediately, completely, quietly. Finally, after letting them stew in the cold long enough, Montgomery stepped out of his caravan. The contrast was almost absurd. The Germans were towering figures wrapped in leather, gold, and iron. Montgomery was a small, wiry man in corduroy trousers, a baggy brown sweater, and a black beret. He looked, at first glance, less like a great commander and more like a local farmer who had wandered onto a military base by accident. But appearances meant nothing now, because as Montgomery walked toward them, he carried something far more powerful than medals or uniforms. He carried absolute authority. The German delegation snapped to attention at once. General Kinzel clicked his heels together with a sharp crack and threw up a perfect formal military salute. Admiral von Friedeberg straightened, puffed out his chest, and prepared to deliver the grand, rehearsed diplomatic speech he had likely imagined all the way there. A speech about mutual respect, about two great military powers, about civilized terms between soldiers. Montgomery walked right up to them. He did not return the salute. He did not offer his hand. He did not even look them properly in the eye. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward his interpreter, and in a sharp, high-pitched voice that carried pure contempt, he asked 4 words that shattered the entire illusion. Who are these men? The silence was immediate, crushing, total. The German interpreter translated the question. General Kinzel's monocle nearly popped from his eye. Admiral von Friedeberg's mouth literally fell open. For a moment, both men were completely unable to speak, because this was not just a slight. It was not just coldness. It was the ultimate insult. These were the supreme commanders of the German military, men whose names had spread fear across Europe for nearly half a decade, men who believed they still stood inside history as giants. And now this small British man in a sweater was looking at them as if they were nobodies, as if they were lost tourists who had wandered onto the wrong patch of ground. And in that instant, their humiliation truly began. Admiral von Friedeberg, visibly shaken and thrown completely off balance, finally managed to introduce himself, and General Eberhard Kinzel. But the polished confidence was already cracking. The grand entrance they had imagined was gone. The diplomatic theater they had rehearsed was gone. And still, clinging to what little remained of their mission, von Friedeberg launched into the pitch they had come to deliver. He explained that they were there to surrender the German forces retreating from the Soviets. He said they wished to negotiate the terms of a fighting withdrawal. That was the core of the plan, not full surrender, not real submission. They wanted an arrangement, a carefully managed exit. They wanted the British to accept German troops moving west, behind Allied lines, so they could avoid falling into Soviet hands. But Montgomery cut him off immediately. "No," he said smoothly. "Certainly not." That was it. Sharp, flat, final. Von Friedeberg blinked in confusion. For a moment, it was as if he could not process what he had just heard. He tried again, pressing the point, explaining that if the British refused these specific terms, then the German army would be forced to keep fighting, and thousands of British soldiers would die. It was framed as logic, but really, what it was a thinly veiled threat from a defeated enemy still trying to pretend he had leverage. Montgomery did not flinch. He looked at the towering German admiral with eyes like chips of flint and answered with a line that slammed the door shut on every German illusion still standing. "You will surrender unconditionally, or I will continue the war, and I will be delighted to kill more of you." That was the moment the delegation began to reel. Their grand negotiation had lasted less than 2 minutes. Less than 2 minutes, and they had already been treated with less respect than a captured private. But Montgomery was still not finished. The humiliation was only deepening. He ordered the sputtering German officers to follow him into a small command tent. And even there, the insult continued. There was no mahogany table waiting inside, no polished room, no ceremonial chairs, no diplomatic setting worthy of great men. There was only a massive mat board, covered by a curtain. Montgomery stepped up to it and pulled the curtain back. What the German High Command saw in that moment was not just a military map, it was the death certificate of their delusions. For months, the leadership of the collapsing Reich had been feeding itself lies. They still talked as if there were operational divisions to command, secure defensive lines to hold, tactical reserves to deploy. They still thought in the language of maneuver, withdrawal, position, and negotiation. But really, what Montgomery showed them was that all of that was fantasy. The map was covered in blue and red arrows, representing the Allied and Soviet advances. It showed British armored columns slicing through northern Germany with zero resistance. It showed the Soviets crushing what remained in the east. It showed the German army not as a fighting force, but as a shattered wreck in full collapse. Montgomery took a wooden pointer and, with agonizing precision, began tapping positions across the board. Here, units surrounded. There, formations cut off. Elsewhere, remnants being systematically destroyed. He did not raise his voice. He did not mock them. He did not need to. That was what made it worse. He presented the facts with the cold, detached precision of a surgeon explaining a terminal diagnosis. Every tap of that pointer stripped away another layer of German fantasy. He proved to them, beyond argument, that they had absolutely nothing left to negotiate with. No operational freedom, no strategic options, no bargaining power, no hidden strength, no miracle reserve, nothing. They were not a formidable army. They were a defeated, broken mob. When Montgomery finished, he turned back toward them, and the transformation in the room was total. General Kinzel, the giant Prussian aristocrat, the so-called Aryan Superman, was staring at the floor. His massive shoulders had slumped. The man who had once towered over others now looked diminished, almost hollowed out by what he had just seen. The monocle, the posture, the aristocratic pose, all of it suddenly looked absurd. Admiral von Friedeberg had gone pale. The smooth diplomatic swagger was gone. The noble self-image was gone. In its place was the face of a man finally being forced to confront the scale of defeat. Then Montgomery delivered the final blow. He handed them a sheet of paper listing his demands. There would be no partial deal, no selective surrender, no protection from the Soviets bought through clever wording. The terms were absolute, unconditional surrender of all German forces in northern Germany, Holland, and Denmark, nothing less. Take this back to your superiors, Monty ordered. You will sign exactly what I tell you to sign, or I will resume the bombardment. There was no discussion after that, no debate, no appeal, no saving phrase left to utter. The Germans had come expecting diplomacy between peers. What they received was annihilation without noise. No shouting, no dramatics, just cold authority. And that, really, was what made the humiliation so complete. Montgomery did not need to perform dominance. He simply embodied it. By the time the delegation left that tent, the myth they had carried with them into Lüneburg Heath had been stripped bare. They were no longer representatives of a mighty Reich. They were messengers of a corpse. And now, for the first time, they knew it. The next day, May 4th, 1945, the German delegation returned to Lüneburg Heath, but this time, there was no illusion left, no trace of negotiation, no fantasy of a tactical arrangement, no belief that they could still shape the end on their own terms. They had gone back to Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, and Dönitz had no choice. He authorized the unconditional surrender. That was the end of the argument. And yet Montgomery was still not finished making the point. He staged the signing ceremony with the same freezing, calculated contempt that had defined the entire encounter from the beginning. He did not choose a grand headquarters. He did not move the event into a stately building. He did not create the kind of dignified setting that German officers had spent their entire careers believing men like them deserved. Instead, he set up a cheap wooden trestle table right outside his caravan, beneath a canvas awning, in the freezing wind. That detail mattered, because this was not just a surrender, it was a public stripping away of myth. When the German officers sat down at that rough table to sign the document, the psychological destruction was complete. British war correspondents and cameramen crowded around them, capturing every second of the humiliation for the world to see. There would be no private dignity, no controlled image, no heroic final pose. Their defeat would be seen exactly as it was. Admiral von Friedeberg, the man who had ordered the sinking of countless Allied ships, reached for the pen. His hand was shaking so violently, he could barely write his own name. The same aristocratic officer who had come expecting diplomatic treatment now sat exposed before cameras, broken by the simple reality that there was nothing left to command, nothing left to save, and no respect left to demand. As he signed the surrender, tears streamed openly down his face. Not hidden, not restrained, open tears. Beside him, General Eberhard Kinzel, the towering butcher of the Eastern Front, signed in absolute silence. His eyes were hollow, dead. The giant frame was still there, but the man inside it seemed to have collapsed inward. The image of the Prussian military elite, polished and severe and proud, had been reduced to something empty, something finished. Then Montgomery signed last, still in the same baggy sweater, still carrying that same air of almost casual authority. And on his face there was no theatrical triumph, no need to gloat, no visible excitement, just a look of mild boredom, as if this final act of the Third Reich had become what it truly was in his eyes: administrative, necessary, already over. That is what made Lüneburg Heath so devastating. The German High Command had come desperate for validation. They wanted the British to recognize them as worthy adversaries. They wanted handshakes. They wanted ceremony. They wanted, even at the very end, to preserve the old myth that they had been noble soldiers fighting a hard but honorable war. But really, what Montgomery understood was that the myth itself had to be destroyed, completely. So he looked at them and asked, "Who are these men?" And with that single question, he shattered the image they had built around themselves. He treated them not as equals, not as peers, not as honorable opponents. He treated them like dirt. He did not just accept their surrender. He stripped them of status, stripped them of dignity, stripped them of the illusion that history still owed them a respectful farewell. He showed them the truth, that they were irrelevant now, beaten men carrying the paperwork of a dead regime into the mud. That is why the legacy of Lüneburg Heath remains one of the most powerful masterclasses in psychological warfare ever recorded. No screaming, no threats beyond what was necessary, no wild displays of rage, just cold control, total command, and a humiliation so complete that it reached beyond the battlefield and into the identity of the men forced to endure it. And the aftermath made that brutally clear. Admiral von Friedeberg would commit suicide 2 weeks later by swallowing a cyanide capsule. General Kinzel would also take his own life shortly afterward. They could not survive the reality of their own irrelevance. They could not live in a world where the myth had been stripped away and exposed as hollow. Lüneburg Heath was not just the site of a surrender. It was the place where the German High Command was forced, at last, to confront what it had become. Not masters of Europe, not guardians of military honor, not giants of history, just defeated men in the mud. If this story stayed with you, leave your thoughts below, like and subscribe in your own way for more stories where history speaks with all its weight.
Woo!